Hey everyone, this is Musictechhelpguy, and welcome to part 3 of my Logic Pro 10 201 course. In this video, I want to show you a cool, easy way to figure out all of your scales and diatonic chords in any major or minor key, so that you can use this as a basis for building the chord progression for a song. The cool thing about this method is that you do not have to have any music theory knowledge whatsoever. However, you will have to understand a few basic music theory concepts. So the first concept is major versus minor keys and scales. A scale is essentially just a set of notes that helps to determine the harmonic or melodic structure of a song. So harmonic meaning the chords and bass line that are actually used to drive the song forward, and melodic meaning the melody. This can be an instrumental melody or the vocal melody. First, let me just pull up my keyboard here. I'm going to go to Window, Show Keyboard. This is a cool little window that lets you see what's going on your MIDI controller. So I'll just pull this up so you can see what I'm doing on mine. So for example, if you have a song in the key of C major, this means that most of the chords and melody are going to be derived from the C major scale. So what's the C major scale? Well, if you start on any root note of C here, or tonic note of C, and you play a scale up with all the white keys all the way up to the next C, you get the C major scale. Now, not all scales are all white keys. You'll notice that the C major scale, it's very simple because it's all white keys. It's the only major scale that's all white keys. The rest of them have some black keys, meaning they have sharps or flats, sharp or flat notes in them. So for example, like E flat major is E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, E flat. So the only major scale that's very simple like that has all white keys is C major. So remember that for later because it's going to come in really handy for us. So if I built a song, for example, in the key of C major, this means that all of the chords and melody are going to be derived from the C major scale. So this means that all of the notes are going to be in the C major scale. So let me just play a little example here. So yeah, that example was a little simplistic and cheesy, but all of the notes are contained within the C major scale. There were no black keys used at all, no sharps, no flats, all white keys were used. So let's try something in minor. So there is a relative minor scale that also has all white keys, and that is A minor. So if I start on any of my A's and I play up one octave, you get A minor. So A to A using all white keys is A minor. Now, if you know a thing or two about theory already, you probably know there's a couple different types of minor scales. That type of minor scale is called a natural minor scale. Now, there's also harmonic minor scales, which have one note altered, and then there's melodic minor scales, which have two notes altered. In this course, because I'm going to be using all diatonic melodies and chords, I'm not going to be using any harmonic or melodic variations of the minor scale. I'm just going to be using the natural minor scale. Now, if you want to learn more about harmonic and melodic minor and creating scales with the circle of fifths, you can go check out my Music Theory for Producers course. However, in this course, we're going to be sticking with just diatonic keys and scales, so it's going to be pretty simplified. So again, C major, all white keys, A minor, all white keys as well. Now, one thing I want to point out here is if you take each note of either the C major scale or the A minor scale and you stack what are called thirds on top of the note. So here's C3, and if I skip a white note, here's D and skip it, and go to E, and then skip F and go to G, I get what's called a triad. A triad is just another name for a chord that only has 3 notes. And if I take that pattern of skipping a white key and move all the way up the keyboard, this gives us 7 chords. And then finally we land on an octave higher. If we do the same for A minor, we can do the same thing. We can skip every other white key. So the cool thing about this is that you can derive all of the chords in a key just by knowing the scale. So if I know an A minor scale, I can figure out all 7 chords in A minor and use this as a compositional tool to flesh out the harmonic basis and bass line for the song. Okay, so that was a long introduction, but I wanted to make sure that everyone understood the basics, just some basic theory terminology before we move on. So I've created a piano track already with the EXS24, and I've called this chord reference. I'm not going to use this track actually as anything musical in my song. It's literally just going to be sort of like a toolkit of chords to pick from. So I'm going to right click here and create a new empty MIDI region, and I'm going to drag this out to bar 8, just like so. Double click and open up in Piano Roll. And then remember what I said, that C major is all white keys. Let's start up here on C3. And using my pencil tool, I'm just going to draw in whole note chords going up the scale. Again, all white keys. And let's go ahead and snap to the bar to make this easy. There we go. And remember what I said, you skip every other white key. So I'm going to skip the D, go up to E, skip F, go up to G. And I'm just going to repeat that pattern over and over. And what you get is you get all 7 chords. You got the scale on the bottom here, but all 7 chords within the C major scale. Now, this top note is doubled. It's the same as the bottom one. So this top chord is doubled. It's just an octave higher than the bottom one. So I'll actually delete that. I don't want to waste a lot of time talking about the different qualities of these chords. Technically, this is a C major chord, a D minor chord, an E minor chord, an F major chord, a G major chord, an A minor chord, and a B diminished chord. But I really don't want to sit and talk about that because, again, I promised you don't have to know any theory for this. So I'm just going to call these the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 chord is what I'm going to refer to them as. You rarely are going to build out chord progressions like this, like in diatonic order. You're typically going to jump around and pick different chords. So what's cool about this is you can cut up these chords out here. Remember that trick I showed you? If you use your scissors tool and then hold Option, it'll slice all of those up there. What you can do is you can use your text tool and you can rename these. I'm going to start on the first one and just type in 1. And notice it actually puts them all in order 1 through 7. If you know a thing or two about music theory, you can give these names. So C major, D minor, and so forth and so on. I'm not going to do that just because I want to keep this simple. And what you can go and do is build an instrument. So real quick, I'm going to build a multi-layered instrument like I did in the previous video. So let me just pull up an ES2 here, and let me get sort of like a pad sound here. I'll use this one called Super Drive, and we'll pull in some strings as well. Let's use Alchemy for this, and I'll go to Strings, Large Ensemble. Let's use 70s synth strings. So I've got this super drive sound, and then these strings. So this will kind of reinforce the high end. One thing I want to do is, I think this is a bit too raspy. I just pulled down the filter here to make it a little less raspy sounding, to basically filter out some of the high end. And then let's add in maybe one more alchemy instrument. Let's go under strings again. Let's go under large ensemble again. Let's use this one called Lush Multi-Layer. See what that sounds like. Yeah, that'll be nice for the mid-range. And then let's add an arpeggiator too, like we did last time. Let's use the retro synth for this. And under synth bass, let's pull up the one called Punchy Electro. And let's add an arpeggiator to this. So right now it's just like a bass synth. So I'm gonna go under MIDI effects here, go to arpeggiator. One thing I like to do is under options, is you can shorten the note length, so it's a little more pointed. And then you can also pull up the octave range to make this go up multiple octaves. And then with all of these selected, I'll create a new track stack, and I'll use a summing stack, and I'll just call this synth layer 1. What I can do is I can mute my chord reference, and I can just start dragging chords down to this layer and start creating chord ideas and harmonic ideas. Now, typically, you want to start on 1, or you want to end on 1. That's generally the rule. You want to start on 1 or end on 1. So let's hold Option and drag 1 down here. Then let's go to 6. Then let's go to 4. And let's go to 5. And then back to 1 again. And after making a few volume and pan adjustments, let's see what this sounds like. So pretty simple, kind of cheesy, but what I am going to do is drag over this, press J, and then I'm going to double click on this. And notice how these chords really jump around. One thing you can do is you can play around with different chord inversions, and this will make the harmonic motion a lot more smooth. Like jumping from 1 all the way up to 6 is kind of disjunct sounding. So if I were to take this top note here and press Shift Option down, it jumps it down an octave, so I'm going to have a little more smoother motion coming up here. Imagine playing this on the keyboard and having to move your hand all the way up and then move it all the way down. So some of these notes, it helps to pull them down an octave to make better, better harmonic motion. And there you go. Or we can pull the whole thing up an octave if it's too, dark and meaty sounding. Maybe I want it a bit brighter, and pull the whole thing up an octave. Or maybe I don't like these notes. Let's pull these down an octave too. So that's just a quick example using major keys. Now, let's say that you wanted to shift this to a different key other than C major. By the way, I just joined those all back together. So I'm back to our original reference here. All you have to do to put this in a different key is transpose this whole set of chords up or down by any number of semitones that you want. Just remember that this is going to be the tonic or the root of the key. So that's C. So we're in C major right now. So let's say I wanted to be in E major. I'll just hold Option and press up a few times until my bottom note gets to E. And now I have an E major scale and all of the chords in E major. So you can shift this around to any key you like and then use that as the foundation of your chords and also later on your melodies. So I think major keys are kind of cheesy. So let's use a minor key instead. So let's do the same thing, create a blank MIDI region here, and let's start with that A minor scale, starting on A here. And just like I did before, I'm going to go up in all white keys. And I won't play the last A. And then you skip every other white key. And there we go. And you can shift these around too. So if you press Option up or down, you can shift them to whatever key you want to use. Now, my song is actually going to be in the key of E flat minor, which is quite a complex key in terms of the number of flats or sharps that are in it, because it's actually E flat, F, G flat, A flat, B flat. This looks like B, but it's technically C flat. That's a whole other story. Well, if you want to learn more about and harmonic notes, you can go watch my music theory for producers course. But B or C flat, D flat, and E flat. So I've got all of my chords here in E flat minor, and I'm going to cut these up as well using that same trick I showed you before. And then I'll use my text tool, drag over all of these, click on the first one, press 1, and it automatically labels them 1 through 7. So the idea that I had for this tune was, instead of starting on 1, it was rather finish each, 4-bar series on 1. So it starts on something else and eventually resolves to 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the 6 chord, and then I'm going to go to the 7 chord, and then I'm going to go to the 1 chord. 6, 7, 1. Now, I actually want the 1 chord to last for 2 bars. So one little trick here is if you hover over the right side on the bottom and you hold Option, you can drag this out, and it actually stretches those notes out. Let me just join this little idea together here. So let's mute out our chord reference, double click and open this up in Piano Roll. Let's give this a listen. Cool. So again, I want to get past this sort of disjunct sounding chord motion, because we've got 2 chords that are really high up and then they just jump down here. Let's smooth out the harmonic motion a bit. First, what I can do is I'm going to take these top notes of each chord. Let's bump those down an octave. That's a lot nicer. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a bass line down here. Now, you could think of the bottom note of each chord as the bass line. I'm actually going to create something a little bit different. So I know this ends on E flat here, so I'll keep that down there. But remember that my 7 chord started on D flat, and my 6 chord started on C flat or B. Even though the bottom note here isn't B or C flat anymore, remember, originally it was. So, that was before we shifted those notes down. So let's give this a listen like this. The only thing I'm not liking is the arpeggiator here. So without using really any complicated theory, I've created this basic 3-chord progression that I can repeat over and over again as many times as I want. Now, I don't want this to get too samey, so let me come up with a second idea that I may use elsewhere. Maybe you want your chorus of your song to be different than the verse of your song. So I'm just going to use my text tool and call this idea 1, and I'm going to come up with another idea. I think this one I'm going to start on 1, so I'll come over here. Start on 1, and I tell you what, let's repeat 1 twice. And then let's go to 4, and let's go to 7, and then maybe we'll go back to 1 again. And I tell you what, I know I've already written the lyrics for this song, and I've kind of written some of the vocal melody. I have it in mind, and I know this really stretches out. So let me just make this 4 bars, and then a 4, a 7, and then 2 bars of 1. I like to work in groups of 4 or 8, but let's see what this sounds like. Yeah, this first chord kind of drags on for a bit too long. So let me hold Option and shrink this back to 2 bars. Let's try putting something else in here. I usually find 6 and 3 are pretty good substitutes for 1. So let's put a 6 in. Let's try that. Cool. I was just kind of humming the vocal melody to myself there. Cool, that sounds a lot better. So I'm gonna drag over this, press J, double click, open it up in piano roll. Let's kind of give it the same treatment that I did before. I pulled a lot of these top notes of these chords down just to make the motion a bit better. Now, again, I could give this the same treatment. I could add a bass line down here. But one of the things I'm going to do later on when I start fleshing out the arrangement for this song is I'm actually going to take the bass line out of these chords and pull them down to a separate track that's just a bass. Because the idea here is you start with these kind of really simple chords and then you explode it out to all these other instruments. You know, you may have an instrument just playing one note of the chord, but all together, all of the instruments in your arrangement are covering all notes and bass line in the chord, along with the vocal melody following the notes within the key of the song. Okay, guys, so that is a simple, I'm using simple in quotations, but that is a simple way to figure out chords and scales and figure out all 7 chords within any major or minor key and use them as a chord reference for composing without knowing any music theory whatsoever. You just have to kind of understand a few basic concepts that we talked about before: major and minor keys, diatonic, scales, triads, etc. Just knowing some basic theory terminology and following this format can help you to flesh out a chord progression for any new song that you're working on. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. You can also check me out on social media on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Patreon. Also at my website, carneymediagroup.com. So again, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you for the support, and thanks for watching.